At the very end of my father's lane, past the mailbox and the last fence post, there is a small wooden box on a single post, about the size of an outhouse, with a slanted little roof to keep the rain off. Inside it, there is a telephone. Not in our house, never in our house. Out there, at the edge of the field, a quarter-mile from where we slept, and every family in our district shared it. As a boy, I would run down that lane in the dark when it rang, my breath showing in the cold, to take a message for a neighbor half a mile the other way. That phone shanty taught me the whole truth about how the Amish really live with the modern world. And it is nothing like what the tourists think. We were never a people who hated the machine. We were a people who drew a line around it. And today, I am going to walk you along that line, one rule at a time, and show you exactly where it runs and why. The first thing you have to understand is that we had a telephone. We simply would not let it in the house. That little wooden shanty at the end of the lane was ours, built by hand, shared among several families whose farms all touched. Inside was a plain phone and an answering machine, and that was all. If someone needed the doctor, or the veterinarian for a downed cow, or a driver for the morning, you put on your coat and you walked out there in the weather, and you made the call standing up in the cold. And that discomfort was not a flaw in the system, it was the system. The whole point of putting the phone a quarter-mile from the kitchen was to make sure it could never become the center of the home. A thing that rings whenever it pleases will rule a house if you let it. It will interrupt the supper, the prayer, the work, the talk between a husband and a wife. So the church did not forbid the telephone. The church exiled it to the end of the lane, where it could serve the family without ever ruling the family. You called out when you needed to. The world could not call in whenever it wanted. Think about how wise that is for a moment, because most people out here have never once in their lives had a quiet house that a screen could not reach into. We did. Every single day. That is the first thing they don't want you to know. We were not afraid of the telephone. We had simply figured out something about it that the rest of the world is only now, painfully, beginning to learn. The second thing is the one that confuses outsiders the most, and it is about electricity. People say the Amish reject electricity, and that is not quite right. What my church rejected was the wire. The line that comes in from the public poles along the road, the grid that ties your house to the great web of the outside world. That connection was forbidden, and not because of the current running through it. It was forbidden because of what it represents. To hook your home to that public line is to tie yourself, physically, permanently, to the world and everything the world will send down that wire next. The television, the radio, the endless pull of fashion and news and noise. My grandfather used to say the wire was a leash and it only ran one direction, so we would not connect to it. But that did not mean we sat in the dark doing nothing. We ran 12-volt batteries to light a workshop. We ran diesel engines and generators for the heavy work. We used compressed air, what some of the men jokingly called Amish air, piped through the barn and the shop to run drills and grinders and saws off of nothing but pressure. We ran hydraulic lines to power the milk cooler and the wood tools. On some farms, a small windmill pumped the water, and a bank of batteries down in the cellar was charged, in the plainer districts, by the diesel, and, in the ones that allowed it, by a single panel of the sun's own light, bolted to the roof of the barn, never to the house. There was power everywhere on that farm. It simply came from our own engines, our own fuel, our own hands, and it stopped at the edge of our own property. It never came in on a public wire from a company in a far-off city, and the men could recite the reasoning to you if you asked. Once you take the company's line, you take the company's bill, and the bill ties you to a job in town to pay it, and the job in town pulls you away from the farm, and the family, and the church, and one wire, quietly, over a generation, unravels the whole cloth. So they cut the wire before it could ever start pulling the thread. That is the second thing they don't want you to know. It was never about the power. It was about who you were connected to and who could reach you through the connection. The third thing walks right up the lane on rubber tires. We were not permitted to own a car. We could not have one titled in our name, could not learn to drive one, could not keep one in the barn, but we were absolutely permitted to ride in one. In the kitchen drawer, next to the matches and the twine, there was a phone number written on a scrap of paper. It belonged to an English neighbour, a man from outside our community, and his job, for a fee, was to drive us. We called him the driver. Every settlement has them. You paid him by the mile, and he would take you to the livestock auction 2 counties over, to the town for the things you could not make yourself, and most of all to the hospital when the hospital could not be avoided. Whole families would fill his van and split the fare. An aunt and 3 children, and a load of canning jars, and the driver would sit in the parking lot with his newspaper for 3 hours and wait, because that was the arrangement, and the good ones knew every back road in the settlement. A buggy cannot carry a labouring woman 40 miles in a snowstorm. The driver can. And so the church drew its line not at the motion, not at the wheel, but at ownership and at speed and at the freedom a man's own car would give him to simply leave whenever he pleased. You could ride the machine. You could not become the master of it. Now, before I take you to the 4th thing, which is the one that finally made all of this make sense to me, do me one small favour. Subscribe so the next one finds you, and leave one word down in the comments, just one, telling me where in the world you are watching from. It matters more than the numbers on a screen for a channel like this one. Because what comes next is where I finally understood the whole design. The 4th thing is inside the house itself, and it is where the whole logic finally clicked for me. Step into a plain Amish kitchen and you will find a refrigerator humming away, keeping the milk cold. But open the panel behind it and there is no cord going to any wall outlet. It runs on propane, a flame you will never see, quietly making cold. The lamps on the walls are gas, hissing softly, throwing a warm, steady light. There is an on-demand water heater fired by propane, so the hot water never runs out. The washing machine has a wringer and it turns on a small gas engine or a line of that compressed air I told you about. My mother's iron was heated on the stove or fired by its own little tank of gas, and her sewing machine ran on a treadle she rocked with her own foot, or in some homes on that same air. Down in the basement, a diesel engine runs the pump that brings water up from the well and keeps the big freezer going through the summer. And out in the barn, that same kind of engine turns the vacuum line that milks the cows before dawn. Everything a family needs is there. Cold food, hot water, clean clothes, light after dark. What is missing is only one thing. Not one cord in that entire house runs to a plug in the wall. And the day I truly saw that, standing in my mother's kitchen as a grown man, something turned over in my head. It was never about being backward. It was never about suffering for its own sake. My people had reasoned their way, appliance by appliance, engine by engine, to a life that had every comfort they decided they wanted, and not one thread of connection to a world they had decided to keep at arm's length. The propane made the cold. Our own diesel made the water rise. But the public wire, the leash that ran one way, that we would not touch. That is the 4th thing they don't want you to know. The house was full of technology. It was simply technology we owned and controlled, instead of technology that owned and controlled us. The 5th thing is where the line gets sharper and harder to walk, and it is about work and money. When an Amish man runs a business, and many of them do, building furniture, framing houses, welding, running a sawmill, the old rules bend to meet the need. That man is allowed a telephone in his shop because a business cannot run on a phone a quarter-mile away in a shanty. He is allowed a fax machine to take orders, and in many settlements there is a whole answering service run by outsiders that takes the calls for a dozen Amish shops at once and passes the messages along. In some districts, he is even allowed a plain computer to keep the books and figure the payroll, so long as it never touches the internet, never connects to that outside web at all. The sawmill down the road from us ran a bank of pneumatic saws off a single roaring diesel, a shop full of screaming steel and flying sawdust, and not one wire running to a pole. And then there are the young men. I will be honest with you, because I was one of them. There were prepaid cell phones tucked in barn drawers and under buggy seats all through my youth, quietly, the boys in their Rumspringer years pushing right up against the edge of what the church would tolerate. The community knows, the bishop knows, and here is where it turns serious, because that line is real, and crossing it too far has a price. When a device pulls a member out past what his district has agreed to allow, when a phone becomes a doorway to the whole world instead of a tool for the work, the church steps in. First a quiet word from the ministers. Then, if a man will not bend, the meidung, the ban, the setting apart from the fellowship until he makes it right. Every new invention that comes along gets carried to the church council and weighed before anyone is allowed to keep it. Nothing is decided by one man alone, and nothing is decided quickly. That is the fifth thing they don't want you to know. There are exceptions everywhere, but every single exception was argued over, prayed over, and granted on purpose, and the man who takes an exception the church never granted him can lose his place at the table. The sixth thing is the answer to the question I know you have been asking this whole time. If one district allows a thing and the next one forbids it, how is any of it decided? And the answer is that there is no single Amish rulebook, no headquarters, no central office. Each church district, each little group of 30 or so families has its own Ordnung, its own understanding, kept in memory and agreed on by the members. And when a new tool appears in the world, that district holds it up to one test above all others. Not, is it modern? Not, is it comfortable? The test is this. Will this thing pull us apart, or will it hold us together? Will it draw a man's eyes down into his own hand and away from his neighbor, or will it help the community keep its shared life? That is why one district will let a family run battery lights, and the next district 3 miles away will look at the very same battery and say no. I watched them argue a diesel freezer for the better part of a year once. The older men worried it would tempt the young to want more and more cold storage and more to sell, the younger men saying it would only keep the garden from spoiling. In the end, the district allowed it, with a limit on the size, and that limit was the whole point, a fence built right into the yes. It is not hypocrisy, though I know from the outside it looks exactly like hypocrisy. It is 30 different families, in 30 different places, each drawing the same fence in a slightly different spot, all of them trying to answer the same question their grandfathers asked. What can we let in that will serve us, and where must we stop it before it starts to serve itself on us? The tourist drives past and sees a phone shanty next to a diesel generator next to a horse and buggy and thinks the whole thing makes no sense. But there is a sense to it, an old and careful sense running underneath every one of those choices. That is the sixth thing they don't want you to know. The line is not random, and it is not backward. It is a fence built by people who thought harder about the machine than almost anyone alive today. I left that community. I made my own choice about that fence, and I stepped over it, and I want to tell you honestly what it cost, because it is not what you would guess. Out here, I have every device a man could want. There is a phone in my pocket that never leaves my side, that rings in the middle of supper, that follows me into the quiet, the way that phone at the end of the lane never could. I have the wire, the grid, the whole endless web running straight into my home and my hand. And I am, in ways I did not expect, lonelier than I ever was walking down a dark lane in the cold to answer a call for a neighbor. Because that walk, that shanty, that fence around the machine, it was never really about the machine. It was about protecting the things that a machine will quietly eat if you let it. The supper that no one interrupts. The evening with nothing glowing. The neighbor you have to actually go and see. People always assume I left because I thought the rules were foolish, that I wanted to mock the phone shanty and the diesel in the basement. I did not, and I need you to hear this plainly. I love these people. I love the stubborn wisdom of a family that will let in the cold and the hot water and the light, but not the leash. There is a genius in it that the whole modern world is only now starting to grasp, too late, after the wire is already in every room of every house. And that, exactly that, is why I cannot keep the silence anymore. Because a people this wise about the machine deserve to be understood, not laughed at, and the only ones who ever saw the whole design from the inside are the ones who were told to keep it to themselves. There is far more than I could fit into one sitting here. The exact way a district votes a new tool, up or down, the arguments I heard the old men make, the things I watched the young men risk and lose. I wrote all of it down, everything I could not quite say straight into a camera. The full pages are waiting in the first pinned comment below. Take care of your people and mind what you let in the door. I will see you in the next one.